And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Patrick Sullivan. He's got two books, Dare to be an Evangelist and Four Monks Walk into a Pub. Welcome, Patrick, to EWTN's Bookmark. And you hear that Four Monks Walk into a Pub, you think there's going to be a punchline. You're not a Catholic comedian, but you're a Catholic author and catechist, right?
I am.
Okay.
And I'm also aware of the running joke, at least in Canada, which is all religions are basically the same. Mm-hmm. So the need, at least in my context, is, well, how do we address this running joke?
Right.
Hence the book.
And that was the book. And that was your first book, right?
That was the first book.
That was the first book.
Right.
Now, the second one we'll start with, which is your latest one, is Dare to be an Evangelist, Evangelizing Those We Love One Day at a Time. Now, this is run over 40 days. Now, is this designed to be 40 days during Lent or any particular time of the year? It could be any 40 days.
It could be any 40 days, but a lot of people have used it during Lent in particular. And the reason's obvious. So we have 40 days running and there's a challenge. Every day, go out and do this thing right now. Don't hesitate. And you get the challenge, the dare, before you finish your coffee.
Now, what's got you so charged up?
I just love the Lord. I just love the Lord. And as I look back to my own experience, it's been a call and a very weak and timid response on my end. Everything I've experienced, everything I encounter with the Lord is just, go, I'm calling you. So this is my attempt to respond.
Okay. Now, you open up, it says, for every soul that I can win for Christ, if I have the courage to be faithful. Why did you start like that?
Because our times, we need courage. We really do. There are many people who love the Lord. They love their family. They love their community. They love even those who hate them. But we're very timid, very shy right now about sharing the faith.
Well, do you
possibly like no other time.
Yeah. Now up in Canada, as related to obviously the United States, where you're from as well, I think of the idea of winning. Win souls for Christ. One might say, well, we're not into winning anymore.
Yes.
Of course, winning's not a good thing. That means somebody loses. And also the idea, doesn't Christ take care of that himself? I mean, isn't it just Christ that converts people? What is our part in that equation?
Well, we're supposed to finish the race, as St. Paul says, and we do want to win, because this is the only context, the only competition where we all win. If I can win my brother or sister, my family member, my friend, my coworker, then they win and I win. So that's the thrust, I think, of the new evangelization. Let's get everyone across the finish line. And if we're not doing that, we all become losers. We all become the kind of people who haven't reached out. And
through our baptism into the church, etc., it's really part of our mission, right?
That's right. That's right.
And to some degree, we'll be held accountable for what we haven't done.
Absolutely.
Which I think, unfortunately, most of us never heard that.
That's right. I was very cognizant on my way down to EWTN on the plane about put down your book, Patrick, and evangelize. Start a conversation. Wear a funny shirt. Get people's attention for the Lord, because if you do, there is that chance that grace can work its way in. And that's what we need. We need to let God work. This book is entirely about letting God work.
Now, right at the beginning, you've got this warning. This book is about making saints and changing lives. Do not take it lightly. Do not begin reading unless your heart is resolute. In this book, we are trying to reach God's children. They are not projects or experiments, but his little ones. You start out tough, and then you go to in a sense, talking about how they're the little ones. Have you had anybody pick up the book and said, well, I'm not ready for this?
Absolutely. In fact, a few people have contacted me and said, you know what, I was gung-ho, but then I realized I'm not ready. I was going to do a couple of pages here, a couple of pages there. And the whole moving from the tough to the soft, that to me is, well, it resonates with me in particular, because as I always think of my fatherhood as for my children, I realize that God is always first powerful, but also playful. He's very powerful, very stern to get us in line, to become saints. But as we're on the way, he says, you are my little one. So I'm here for you. And that's what we want to convey to people. Yes, we need to correct ourselves, correct our lives. But there's this great Father. He loves us.
Do you think, you're a young guy, young father, and is this something that you see really coming out of your own experience for your own generation and the people who you grew up with and are growing up now, even more important to take this kind of approach to reach them than maybe some of us oldsters?
Well, I don't know about the oldster-youngster dichotomy there, but at least for my context where I am, there's a great question mark. Everyone in my context is saying, okay, we know that we have to evangelize. We know we do. But how do we? How do we do that? And so I know for a long time myself, just looking around saying, what is the method? Is there a method? Is there a program? I'm also aware that we don't preach programs, we preach Christ. And we preach Christ by our day-to-day. What do I do today, right now, when I get up in the morning? and then evaluate it as I'm going to bed. Well, what happened? Did I preach Christ? Was I faithful? Did I have the courage?
That's why you kind of have your checklist you have here.
Exactly.
Day by day as you go along, and it kind of builds one day after the other. Right at the beginning, you talk about I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. Obviously, part of the mission of evangelizing, and make it about mission, not maintenance. You say when the church. You talked about when the church is mission oriented, things are growing and good. Conversely, and which I think is probably talking about maybe about what's been happening the last 50 years anyway in the church, maybe longer in some cases. Depends on part of the world I guess you're in. When the church and its members have lost sight of their mission and tried to maintain the position, benefits, and status of the previous generation, the church has been a scandal and a stumbling block for many. So the question is, are you a missionary or a maintainer?
That's right.
Are most of us maintainers at this point, you think?
I think a lot of us are. We get some of these gems of the faith and we hold it to ourselves. We take our traditions, we take our feasts, and we say, well, it's ours. Sorry you don't understand it. Now, I was kind of thrown in the fire, so to speak, when I kind of came back to the church as a teenager, because I didn't really have that Catholic context in my family.
What sparked that return?
A girl. It was interesting for me because my interest in her led to the interest in her family, which lived a very different way. And their way was Catholic, as I was going to find out later. But the strange thing was, they looked at me and said, well, this is yours too. How come you're not living it? So there was a real challenge there for me. For me, this is about the day-to-day, the going out and being who you're called to be.
So have the changes you made subsequent to that impacted your own family?
Absolutely.
Your parents?
Absolutely, same thing. But it had to be in subtle ways. For my family, it wasn't
So
that...
you didn't put a soapbox up in the middle of the living room and grab the catechism and start preaching?
Well, I would say I didn't, but we'd have to ask them, of course, because it always looks in from the other side. But I'm also aware that my family, they were never antagonistic towards the faith. But for them, it was just not useful. So if it's not useful, if it's not making you different, why on earth would we want it? If it's not making you a saint, they wouldn't use that word, but if it's not making you a saint, why on earth would I go there? So I needed to try and continue to try different methods to bring them to the Lord. And one of them is simply, shocking, become a saint, Patrick. Do the little things every day so they can see a difference.
Right, exactly. In your example. In day 2, you'd say, time for a different approach. You see, when we were children, we asked different questions and needed different proofs of God's love, but we all change. It is time we embrace this fact and really begin to look at what people need to find in Christ. So is that idea of saying that in some cases a lot of us have a basic faith that, kind of stopped at confirmation?
It's
you know
true.
what I mean? And we have
true.
to move past that?
But it's more than that as well. You've probably noticed, I'm sure, that we tend to, when we're evangelizing, tell people what they need. You really need to know about this issue. You really need to know about this. When point in fact, they're asking a simple question or they have a very different concern than we're giving them. So the point here is, stop telling them what they need and show them Christ. Stop saying, here, I want to explain the Crusades to you, and just be with them. First as friends, then as people who look as friends towards the Lord. And all goes well from there.
Right. It starts many times in just the basic question of why should I care?
That's right.
I mean,
That's
is there
right.
some reason I should care? Day 3, you say, accept your mission. It's been said that many love God, but few love His will. How was that for you?
Well, friends of mine have said, Patrick, you don't have many gifts, but one of them is you seem to accept the Lord's will more willingly than other people. And I don't know how true that is, but I found it is most difficult to accept His will. Lord, I want to be like this for you. I want to evangelize like this for you. And I want to evangelize those people, not those other people. Well, the fact of the matter is, go where He sends you. Don't run off to Tarshish. Don't do any of that. Go where He sends you. And so we need a radical listening. And that's where we discern the Lord's will.
And for most of us, really, that's in our everyday life, with the people we meet every day at work or in our family. It's not being asked to go to some exotic location, etc. It could be for some, but that's not really what most of us are called to do. You say in day 6, decide not to judge. Now this is one, we can't judge anybody. You say, though your mission will thrive or starve to the degree that you develop authentic friendships with those people the Lord has sent to you. A key to a dynamic and healthy friendship is the absence of judgment. So how do we balance that kind of non-conditional, everybody's okay, versus the fact that, I still love you as a person?
Absolutely. I'm not advocating here a kind of live however you want, we'll see how it turns out for you, good luck to you. What I am saying is, as friendships develop, it should be very clear where you stand. And that's something I strive for myself. I want my friends to know exactly where I stand because, well, this is who I am. But I also want them to know that I'm not using my vantage point to hit them over the head with. I want them to know, I know Patrick agrees with this, believes this. Well, hold on, how does that make him to me? How does he behave towards me?
Right.
From that
I see
point?
what he says, I see what he preaches. How does he actually live? When he's living it out, am I seeing that happening?
Right. And in my life, because friends always are interwoven, their lives are always interwoven.
Well, when you talk about that as well as friends, I mean, I can understand you have friends and you live it out and you do your little evangelization in that sense and you're authentic and you love them where they're at and work from there. But what about, I mean, do you go out and target people because you'd like to convert them or, and then you figure out how to become their friend? Or is it really the idea for most of us, it's just working with the people who are already in our circle?
Well, I think friendships, to begin with, always take work. There has to be an active decision, an act of the will that says, I will not only befriend you, but I will continue to be your friend. And that takes work. That takes a decision-making process. So go after those who the Lord is putting in front of you to befriend. But again, if you're just looking at them as something to check off, okay, I got that one, well, something's all wrong.
Right.
And there is no evangelization.
Another scalp on your belt.
That's right. It's failing already from the outset. So what we're talking about here is, Lord, do you want me to go to this one? Yes? Okay, then how can I really be a friend to them?
But why did you bring this person into my life? Or what? There was an opportunity for me to reach out, and did I or I didn't?
That's right. That's right.
Exactly. Now, day 11, I thought this was interesting. I wanted to look at know your weaknesses, okay? How do you know your weaknesses? Is that basically listening to what other people tell you, or is it looking in the mirror and realizing what they are? How do you deal with that?
Well, if you're married, ask your spouse.
Okay.
That can be as simple as. One thing I do in my own home, though, is we do an examine at the end of the day. We examine our consciences, and I try to get one-on-one with my children. I have 6 beautiful children, and in particular, I sit down with them and I say, how could you have done it better today? And we go through a process, but at the end of it, I always ask them, and they always seem surprised. I say, how can Daddy be a saint tomorrow? And children have crystal clear, thinking when it comes to the dad I know you can be and the one I saw today. So ask those you love and ask those who love you. And the more they love you, they will be clear and charitable, which we need for our own egos.
Have they started to become manipulative yet in their discussions of Daddy could do better by letting me do this or that, which he didn't let me do today?
Long time ago.
Okay, day 13. Beware the millstone, and use the quote from Mark 9:42. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. And you say, do you remember a time when you found out that a person was not really as great as you thought they were? Do you remember how that felt?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I'm not trying to hit here about, we have these images of people, we put them on a pedestal. We all do that from time to time. I'm talking about when you look at a person's life and you say, there goes a Christian, I want to be like them. And then you find out they were not seeking the Lord. They were not trying to live that Christian life. That is scandalous. That is scandalous. We have to find ways as much as we can to be authentic.
And we have to make sure we're not that person.
That's right.
Okay.
And this book is designed especially whenever it's highly critical, it's meant to be a mirror for yourself. Whenever it's gentle and meek and unassuming, it's for the other person. Let's find sin within and find God's grace without.
Day 20, this is one, your secret weapon, the Rosary. All acts of piety are not equal. Some are more powerful than others because they are like a specific vitamin that a soul needs to digest to get stronger. And the Rosary. Now we hear that, and that's very nice. I don't like the Rosary so much. It's it's boring or whatever. Are young people really interested in praying the Rosary? Does it take too long? Can we do a shortcut Rosary? It takes less time.
Well, I find...
Why the Rosary in your mind? Obviously, it must have an impact in your life or you wouldn't bring it up.
That's true, that's true. Early on when I met this girl and she was bringing me to the Lord and meeting her family, one of the first things she did, very bold of her, was she gave me a Bible and she gave me a Rosary. And for me, I knew what they were, but I was disgusted by them because it meant I had to respond on my part. I had to engage, I had to call on the mother and say, I need your help. Now, throughout my journey thus far, the Rosary has been that help. And of course, the saints will call it the weapon, Padre Pio. So it is that. But I'm also finding among the young, the Rosary, when taught in a different way, when, for example, very often when I'm talking with young people, I'll say, who are you praying for? And they'll say, so-and-so. I say, well, what are you praying for? And that stops them cold. because they don't put it together that the God who loves me and Mary, the Mother of God, might actually be concerned with the exact need. See, once that need is named and put out there, the Rosary and other forms of piety take on a special significance. Suddenly it's not just something I'm doing, this matters. So that's what we're trying to do. Pray like it matters.
Day 34 into day 35, you say, live simpler than others. Is that just the idea of not getting caught up in material things? Or what?
Absolutely, but at the same time, and we're seeing the Francis effect. Why is it so many people in the world are looking at Pope Francis and saying, I like this guy? Well, I would argue that one of the most basic reasons is he's living simpler than he could, or some would argue should. So in wherever I'm living, my neighbors, if they look at me and say, how come you don't have cable? We all have cable. Well, now that poses a question, and they want to know that. That's intriguing. You could have a comfort, but you don't. Why? And whenever we pose a question or put that question in their minds, now dialogue is open and we can discuss.
Well, I would just tell them because I get an EWTN on my Roku box or on my satellite, and that's
And
why
that
I
would be
don't
a very
have
good answer.
And that's why I don't have it. That's Dare to be an Evangelist, evangelizing those we love one day at a time. Now, this is the joke book here. 4 monks walk into a pub, but it's really no joke. It's actually quite serious. The world's religious discuss some of the most common questions about life. I started reading this, and I found it initially, it was like just, you kind of jump in.
I do.
I mean, it's not a big setup of what you're doing here. You suddenly find yourself with a bunch of people, Sophie, a Buddhist, a Christian, an atheist, and a Hindu, and then Scott, and people show, and they're all talking about their faith or what their faith means to them. Where did this come from?
Well, interesting beginnings. A couple of years ago, I was teaching a course on ethics to a bunch of religious educators. So these were people who were taking this course because they wanted to teach people about Christianity in particular. And I was up at the blackboard writing something, and someone interrupted me, and they said, Patrick, and I turned around and she said, you're making it sound like Jesus is God. And now keep in mind, these are Christians who are going forward to teach religious education, Christianity in particular. I held back my face, I didn't contort or anything, and the only thing that possibly did that for me was one, grace, but the second was no one else reacted in the room. It wasn't a shock, so I said, is that new for anyone else here? And there was a class of about 30 people there. All but one put up their hand.
Really?
This was a new concept. And it struck me at that time.
Who did they think Jesus was?
The Son.
Oh, okay.
So he can't be God because he's the
okay.
Son of God.
Right, okay.
For, at least in
So
Canada,
God is God the Father.
God is God the Father, that's it. God is God the Son. See, it's obvious.
Right.
There we go.
Right.
Why we jump in is because everyone knows this conversation already. And it goes something like, Jesus, Christianity is different, right? No, they're all basically the same. See? Right. And so we all know that, especially in Canada, the conversation.
You can boil it down to love one another.
Absolutely. In fact, why don't you choose the one that's easiest on your life? Doesn't that make sense?
Isn't that what a lot of people have actually done?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because in some ways you can see it's so interesting to watch the things. I always think some of these programs that seem so interested today with zombies and other things that have to do in a sense with an afterlife. It's the human condition to try to deal with that, and they're not dealing with it in the traditional ways. And then you get the spirituality of some of these other religions where, it's not religion, which means I can basically believe or do what I want.
That's right. That's right. And
but it feels spiritual.
Exactly. And this book is these different worldviews calling each other to task, using their human reason, saying, well, how come you guys do this? And how come you do that? And so they have to find what is the reasonable defense for that. Not just piety, not just this is our tradition, but why? Truth matters. Well,
there's two that jump out at you here. There's a Buddhist and a Hindu and an atheist, and it's interesting, of course, because people would have said before, well, atheists don't believe in anything, but atheism seems to be its own religion these days, and it seems to be getting much more prominent and virulent, especially with the young, right?
And we can't keep them out of the conversation anymore. Any discussion around worldviews or religions, that's why I tend to using the label worldviews. We have to include them because they're often the most expressive about the afterlife, what is the human person, etc. So we have to have them in that conversation.
Now, you didn't have an agnostic here. You had somebody who was atheistic. A lot of people who call themselves atheists in some ways are actually more agnostic than anything, and they just don't know.
That's true. And I wanted to go after the atheists because those who are decidedly atheists share their opinions most readily.
Right.
In my life, those who are agnostic tend to shy away from any discussion.
Right, well, they're a little more into the, whatever you want to believe, I guess.
That's right. They shrug their shoulders
I don't know
and they
either.
move on.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes you happy. The other, so you got that. There's no Muslims in this
That's right.
Was that a conscious decision, or did you invite one and he didn't show up in the book?
Well, in the book, he's kind of left to the side. And the reason given is, well, he's too argumentative. We don't like that kind of thing. We're all for tolerance. We want a discussion, which you find out they're not too into that either.
Right.
But they want people to agree with them.
Everybody's tolerant of their own opinions.
That's right. In the book especially, they're saying, we want people, a melting pot. We're all basically the same, hence the joke. We're all doing the same thing. We're all approaching the same end, aren't we? And Muslims, for whatever we can say to them, are very clear about it. No, we're not. We're doing something radically different. So they exclude them from that conversation. Now, from my point of view, I'm thinking about a further book down the road where we can have those very intense conversations. So that'll be something else to come.
Right. And the other one that's missing from here is, though you have a Christian, you don't have a Catholic.
That's right.
But you refer to the Catholic all the time here. Why did you just use that as a device, right?
I did. I thought if I put the Catholic in there, it would be very clear to anyone that you're just trying to push Catholicism. But I couldn't avoid the fact that the answers to all the objections that these worldviews raise for one another, the real responses are found in Catholicism. How we answer the Hindu or how we answer the atheist, really the best response is the Catholic response. And without going into particulars, I mean, I firmly hold that. I say to my friends and family, if you can show me that Catholicism is not true, then I won't be Catholic, because truth matters. And that kind of puts them off for a second. Really, it's not just this tradition. No, it's truth. For me, that's huge.
Well, one of the things, obviously, you're building basically through the whole book, and the discussion leads you to basically chapter 6, which really addresses which is really what the underpinning is. Are all religions basically the same? And it's interesting because this Christian who responds to Sophie, so is that the goddess of wisdom and some embodiment there? The question is, are all religions, and I guess we could also say worldviews, basically the same? And I thought that the Christian quickly, yes, they are.
Yes.
And Scott, who does Scott represent?
Well, for me, Scott...
He says, are you kidding?
Scott represented for me...
that was my response. Why would she say that?
That's right. Well, again, Scott is the man I've met, or the person I've met over the years, what we call the fundamentalist Christian. It's black or white, that's it, absolutely not, or absolutely yes. Yet the Christian, who we call the Christian in this story, are the countless others I've met who profess Christianity and yet are the great exponents of this whole thing. It's all the same.
Many paths up the mountain. Kind of syncretism, as you were saying, right?
That's right.
Well, also, and Sophie, this then makes the other point, what's the difference between equality and sameness? And she says, is that even a word? Why do you deal with that issue?
Well, I deal with that issue because that's something that is prevalent in so many different conversations in the North, here in the United States as well, and possibly all over. Aren't we all basically the same? And if we're all basically the same, then we're all basically equal. It's the syncretism put to the human level on other aspects as well, in other contexts. So we have to deal with that. When someone's looking at me and saying, you're the same as me, I'm the same as you are, our religions are the same, everything's the same, therefore it's an equal playing field at all costs. Well, that's just not true. The fact of the matter is I'm different from my wife, I'm different from my children. And if I'm going to love them, I have to love them how they are. And for evangelization, that's important. When we're talking about marriage, that's important. When we're talking about how we educate, that's extremely important. So I thought it needed to come up because it does very often in different ways.
Yeah, because it seems to be, and I'm assuming it's the same way in Canada as it is here, maybe even slightly more so in some ways, in the sense of that we're really the greatest of all the commandments is toleration today,
it is,
right?
Yeah, I read that somewhere.
Right,
yeah.
that's the one. It was actually number 1, and Moses dropped it on the way down, apparently. But that was the one we were missing all these years, the toleration. Though it seems that it only runs one way sometimes on those things as well.
Absolutely,
right?
And you know what? It's funny in a sense that we can bear all these objections that come at us, and yet when we start the response, suddenly the conversation drops. I saw that most pointedly with the Da Vinci Code years ago. People were saying, Patrick, you need to read this book. This will help affect your thoughts and whatnot. And I said, well, do you realize that it's not historically accurate? Oh, but it's just a fiction work. You know, well, hold on a second. You were saying that this would change my thought pattern on historical Christianity, and yet it's just a piece of fiction.
Right. When it gets challenged, well, it's not really. You know, it's.
That's right.
Yeah, right. exactly. So what's the next book? Is it going to be picking out, is it 5 monks walk into a pub, or the...
if I can find enough characters.
Right.
No, I'm actually working on a few. One is on Mary from the Old Testament, which I'm just in love with right now, in particular the Magnificat, but also a great series we're working as well as Life of Grace on the sacraments.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for also being on Life on the Rock when you were on a few months back as well.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll see you again. Okay. Thank you so much. Talking with author Patrick Sullivan about 2 of his books, Dare to be an Evangelist, Evangelizing Those We Love, One Day at a Time, and also 4 Monks Walk into a Pub, both available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.